I should start the video by saying that I'm not a medical professional, so please don't take anything I say in this video as professional medical advice. That being said, here's the video I put off for about a month because I couldn't find a way to make it as interesting as I wanted, but I still felt compelled to tell you the reason for my 2-month absence. Much of my life in San Francisco is me just walking. If I can get to a place on 2 feet in a reasonable amount of time, that's my preferred mode of transportation. It's how I build the library of B-roll for my videos. But if you were to look at the folders of that library, you would notice a conspicuous uptick in gaps in September and October 2024. Around mid-August, I started getting seemingly random episodes of nausea and dizzy spells about 30 minutes into some of my walks. For context, on days without scheduled workouts, I would typically go for walks that range from 45 to 60 minutes. Whenever these nausea and dizzy spells happened, I thought maybe I just ate something bad, so I'd hurry home, and then I immediately felt better upon getting home. Fast forward to mid to late August when I started getting regular episodes of headaches and chest pain that I didn't at all connect to the seemingly random episodes of nausea and dizzy spells that hit me during some of my walks. My theory for why these headaches and chest pains were happening was that this was somehow related to my recent diet change. In mid-July, I changed my primary protein source from steak to chicken due to cost savings and because chicken was an easier protein source to consume in large amounts. I figured maybe I'm just over-seasoning the chicken and it's causing my blood pressure to spike, so initially I just under-seasoned the chicken. This change helped relieve my symptoms a little. But in early September, I switched back to steak as a primary protein source, and almost immediately, just about all of my chest pains went away, and most of my headaches went away. So this led me to my second theory, which is that perhaps I was suffering from anemia. After all, the mineral profile of beef is more robust than the mineral profile of chicken, especially for zinc and iron. It's also important to note that I ran a marathon in late July, and few things ravage your iron levels like endurance running, especially if you combine weekly moderate to high intensity sessions of cardio with moderate to high intensity sessions of resistance training like I did during 2 of my 4 weekly workout days. But then in early September, the nausea and dizzy spells I experienced during my walks were increasing in frequency. But now they included lightheadedness and heart palpitations. And these symptoms were beginning to happen progressively earlier during my walks. I also had episodes of nausea throughout a walking tour of a store for a new job and had to cut my visit short. This was the tipping point to contact my doctor. I sent him an email and 2 days later he responded saying that based on my symptoms, I should come in for some lab tests and an EKG. Mid-September is when things began to escalate. On the night of Friday the 13th, I woke up in a sweat after just 1 to 2 hours of sleep. All day Saturday the 14th and Sunday the 15th, my head felt funny as if I wasn't fully conscious, and my limbs felt like this tingly buzz that mimicked a full-body infection. It wasn't quite bad enough to check myself into urgent care, so I figured I would just tough it out until Monday when I get my lab work and EKG done. Surprisingly, the night of Saturday the 14th, I got a full night of sleep, likely due to the sleep debt from the previous night. But the night of Sunday the 15th, I stayed up due to chest pain that lasted 2 hours before it got replaced with tightness in my legs. Since I wasn't going to get any sleep, I figured I would be productive somehow. So I did probably the last thing that a person in my physical situation would do. I worked out. I have a history of religiously sticking to my workout schedule. It was a Monday morning. Monday morning is workout time. So I did a resistance training workout. I actually completed most of the workout, but my body was too weak to do the abs and core exercises, and I wasn't going to dare to run based on how I felt whenever I walked for even a few minutes. So I showered, ate, completed an early work shift, and headed to the doctor's office for the EKG and lab work. The EKG was pretty quick. They just lift up your shirt, tape some wires to it, and then take them off after a few minutes. The person who administered the test told me the EKG showed abnormalities and that I need to go upstairs to see my doctor right away. But this is nothing new to me since I have a history of abnormal EKGs, so I wasn't particularly worried. So we head upstairs together on the elevator, and I get called in by a nurse who types up basically all of the symptoms I've told all of you up to this point before leaving while I wait for my doctor. It turns out that my doctor is on vacation. Of course. So after waiting for some time, a different doctor comes in and says there's nothing on my EKG that concerns her. In fact, her words were that my EKG looked pretty boring. Her theory for my chest pain is that it's radiating from tight muscles in my back that I don't stretch or massage. She illustrated this by using her knuckles to find knots in my back, and each one she found caused this intense discomfort that led me to believe that she's probably onto something. So she gave me some acupuncture, i.e. she stabbed all of those knots in my back with a bunch of needles, and then sent me out. I went downstairs to get the blood work done and then went home. The next day, I felt generally pretty poor again, like I was again fighting a full body infection, and this escalated into the evening around the 7 to 8 p.m. hour when I decided I'm going to the emergency room, which is a decision I halfway regret. I checked myself into the ER around 8:40 p.m. and spent an hour fighting nausea while waiting to be called into the smaller room.
You know, so you think you're going to see the doctor, but you're not, are you? No, you're going into the next waiting room, the littler waiting room.
I got called into the smaller room 3 different times before getting seen by a doctor. The first time was to get my blood pressure and weight measured. The second time was to get an EKG. And the third time was to get my blood sugar measured. They said my blood sugar was kind of low and asked if I was eating enough. And I told them that normally I would have had another meal by then, but wasn't feeling well enough to eat that afternoon. Following my 4th and final wait in the main waiting room where I sat on the floor holding my knees because it was the only position that seemed to minimize the nausea and full body discomfort, I finally got called into the deeper part of the ER department. One of the nurses wheelchaired me to a bed that was in the hallway because apparently there were no available rooms. If you think this is the point when a doctor shows up, you're wrong. Another nurse arrives to take my blood pressure and give me an IV to take some blood for testing and to give me whatever drugs they needed to give me. During my ER visit, I went through 2 main procedures, an X-ray on my chest and an MRI on my head. The MRI was normal, but the X-ray showed a slightly enlarged heart profile. Even though I only got the 2 main procedures, I was in the ER from 8:40 p.m. until after 2 a.m., and their conclusion was, you probably just get migraines. I understand that these doctors go through probably a decade of medical school, which I highly respect, but the migraine explanation is one that I just didn't buy. Nonetheless, this is when they sent me home. So at this point, I've had visits to hospitals on consecutive days where I was seen by dozens of medical staff and none of them could figure out what was causing my symptoms. With seemingly no other options, I tried the old-fashioned elimination diet. Reflecting on the previous week of torture, I realized that there was a correlation between my worst week of symptoms and an uptick in the number of oranges I was consuming. The reason I was eating more oranges was to pair a source of vitamin C with my meals, because vitamin C supposedly helps with iron absorption, because you may recall my anemia theory. So I decided to go orange-free for a day, and my symptoms significantly improved. That day was the best I felt in weeks, so of course this spawned another theory. Perhaps I have a citrus sensitivity. Looking back on the headaches and chest pains I had in August when I switched my primary protein source to chicken, I remembered that the chicken introduced lemons into my diet because I prepared my chicken with lemons among other ingredients. So after one day of going orange-free, I went orange-free again the next day. That next day, I didn't feel as well as I did the previous day. It was still a noticeable improvement before the first orange-free day, but it was a bit worse than the first orange-free day. I definitely seem to be getting warmer with the oranges theory, but I had to consider the possibility that the culprit is something else. Then, at the end of that second orange-free day as I was winding down for bed, I had a light bulb moment. I remembered a moment from earlier that day when I chugged a half bottle of water after a small snack, and this was merely minutes after chugging 3/4 of a bottle of water after another small snack. So I thought, wait, do I compulsively chug water after everything I eat, no matter how small the meal or snack? So after I wind down and hop into bed, I look up overhydration. The results showed basically every symptom I had suffered from, along with additional symptoms for severe and or acute cases. So I put this theory to test by limiting my fluid intake to a single 16.9 ounce bottle, or 500 milliliters, that I would sip throughout the day, and this would be entirely electrolytes that I had left over from my marathon training. I saw significant improvement after that day. So I repeated this forced semi-dehydration the next day, and the improvements continued. But I realized that forced semi-dehydration was not sustainable, because while the pain associated with the apparent overhydration seemed to be dissipating, my body was now sending me signals of dehydration. So I ordered electrolyte mixes with high sodium content from companies that are not sponsoring me, even though this is about as effective of an ad as it gets because I'm basically using their products to recover. In the first 2 to 3 weeks of consuming only these electrolyte mixes for fluids, I saw a continued steady improvement of my symptoms, but without them being replaced by equally annoying dehydration symptoms. During the first week, I limited fluid intake to 2 500 milliliter bottles of highly concentrated, highly salty mixes per day. After that, I cut back to 1 highly concentrated bottle while adding 2 to 3 less concentrated bottles, and this seems to have struck the right balance between ensuring the sodium levels remain high enough for me to continue recovering while feeling properly hydrated in the process. So even though I was never officially diagnosed, I'm convinced that what I had and am still recovering from as of this video is a mild chronic form of hyponatremia. At the beginning of my recovery, I couldn't handle much outdoor physical activity, so I ordered this treadmill to do some walking and light jogging. But as the recovery period has progressed, I've slowly reintroduced outdoor physical activity in the form of nighttime runs and occasional walks where the goal is to see how far I can walk without nausea. For some reason, the runs feel better than the walks, but thankfully both seem to be slowly improving as of this video. But I have had some setbacks, so I'm not 100% sure if I'm on the right track. Hopefully by mid to late fall, I will feel a lot closer to my normal self, because I would love to regularly get back outside again with my camera. As of this video, I get symptoms much less when I'm outdoors at night than when I'm outdoors during the day, so most of the content I post online during October and November will be at night. So what is hyponatremia? According to the National Kidney Foundation, hyponatremia is when the level of sodium in your blood is lower than normal. Sodium is an important mineral that helps balance the amount of fluid in your body. It also helps your nerves and muscles to work properly. When the sodium level in your blood is too low, extra water moves into your cells and makes them swell. This can be dangerous, especially in the brain where there is not a lot of room to expand. So if you've ever heard or read high-profile stories of water intoxication, this is what's happening to the body in acute cases when someone drinks too much water in a short period of time.
We knew nothing could really happen on the air because it got approved through all the management parts and promotions.
But something did happen in the water drinking contest. Jennifer Strange, a mother of 3, died of hyponatremia, a fatal dilution of the blood.
But even in chronic milder cases such as mine, I can tell by the symptoms I get when I attempt to go for a walk during daylight hours that I possibly have some brain swelling that wasn't picked up on the MRI during my ER visit. During almost all of my daytime walks I attempt, I still get nausea along with a headache on the left side of my head that basically just stops me in my tracks. This happens less often during nighttime walks, which suggests that there could be a light sensitivity and/or overstimulation component to this. So it feels like the road to recovery is going to be slow and uncomfortable, but the good thing is that we are in the part of the calendar when days get progressively shorter, which will maximize the amount of time I can venture outside while I slowly improve. Hopefully. Now let's talk about why every healthcare professional I came in contact with misdiagnosed this, assuming my hyponatremia theory is correct. The first is that low sodium levels cause symptoms that numerous other common conditions or illnesses can cause, leading to doctors basically just guessing at where to even start with such a patient. The second is that my sodium levels sat in the air quote normal range of 135 to 144 milliequivalents per liter. I use air quotes because that's the normal range for someone who's, well, normal. But is it the healthy range for someone who runs and lifts at moderate intensities fairly regularly? My theory is that it is not. It's just a theory because there doesn't seem to be much literature online about mild chronic hyponatremia. There also doesn't seem to be, frankly, any literature online about how the combination of physical activity and high water intake over a long period of time can leave a person susceptible to symptoms of low sodium. One of the reasons I've painstakingly put together this video is to add a novel perspective to the lackluster online material about the condition. Because as of right now, the vast majority of online material about mild chronic hyponatremia that exists is in the form of Reddit stories. I came across a Reddit thread in June 2020 titled, "People who have experienced hyperhydration, what symptoms did you experience and how did it happen?" Two stories in this thread stood out to me. The first is by a user who said, "This just happened to my stepdad a bit ago. He was furloughed due to COVID. He kind of didn't know what to do with himself and my mom was still working. So he'd sit at home bored all day watching TV and just drinking water. According to my mom, he was drinking 8 to 12 ounces of water an hour all day, so somewhere between 15 and 20 cups of water a day for about 2 weeks. Long story short, he started having an accelerated heart rate and a persistent headache along with sudden weakness. Since it was the weekend, they went to urgent care. They tested him for COVID and didn't do much else. They went to an ER later that night. Essentially, he was drinking so much water that his salt levels were very low and it started affecting several areas of his body. It was nothing life-threatening, but his body was so out of whack that he needed a week of constant monitoring, IVs, etc. for it to be considered safe for him to go home." Edit. I don't know if this fits with your research since this wasn't an I'm going to drink 200 cups of water in 6 hours situation, but a situation that played out a little more slowly. The second story that caught my attention was the very next one. That user said, "I was drinking 3 to 4 liters of water/coffee per day without incident until one Monday when the penny finally dropped. I had a seizure from it that day. After that, I was dizzy and nauseous. I couldn't keep anything, solid or liquid, in because I was losing it from both ends. My mind was in a fog, and I generally felt like hell. Wednesday morning, my parents took me to the hospital because I hadn't improved. My sodium had dropped to 111, normal is 136 to 145, and both my kidneys had shut down. I was on dialysis in the hospital for a week before I was released. I was put on strict instructions not to exceed 2 liters of fluid per day from now on." And in case you're wondering, this is what 2 liters of fluid looks like, which makes sense because each of these bottles is equivalent to about 2 cups of water. Earlier I explained why doctors misdiagnosed my condition. So why did I misdiagnose it, aside from the obvious fact that I'm not a medical professional? Early symptoms were mild enough for me to believe they were random, which is why I thought I might have just eaten something bad during those episodes. Then, when symptoms got less random, I associated those symptoms with a diet change I made around the time because I don't often make significant diet changes. This diet association was further reinforced by the fact that 2 of the symptoms that I had around the time, which were the episodes of headaches and chest pain, almost entirely went away when I switched my diet back. I mentioned earlier that my theory was that I was over-seasoning my meals, leading to higher blood pressure. But based on my prevailing hyponatremia theory, it's more likely that my symptoms were much stronger during that brief period due to that diet enabling me to eat more often, which caused me to drink more water during that period. And that might also explain why under-seasoning those meals resulted in improved symptoms because, as I recall, under-seasoning those meals made those meals less palatable, so I actually just ended up eating a lot less of those meals. I actually ended up having a lot more leftovers, and so that probably resulted in me drinking less water. The reason it's important for me to include this section is to make you aware of how sneaky this condition is, so you don't overlook it as a possibility if you ever develop similar symptoms. Especially because the nature of the symptoms can throw both you and your doctor into the wilderness. Because as I mentioned earlier, low sodium levels can cause symptoms that numerous other common conditions and illnesses can cause. Another thing I mentioned earlier is that if I do indeed have some brain swelling and it was due to hyponatremia, the road to recovery could be slow and uncomfortable. Because based on everything I've read about cerebral edema, it could be weeks or even months before I even get close to normal again. This means weeks or months of me occasionally going for a walk to see how far I could go without nausea. Recovery could look something like 1 to 2 walks per week, where 1 week I'm able to go 3 to 5 minutes, and a couple of weeks later I'm able to go 5 to 10 minutes, and perhaps a couple of weeks after that I'm able to go 10 to 15 minutes, and so on, which will basically be the reverse of how these symptoms progressed over time. In the meantime, I suppose if I somehow come up with video ideas and actually make them, the nature of them will be, well, frankly, anything that doesn't involve me going outside aside from rare occasions. This will mean boring domestic stuff about the life of a bachelor who's basically trapped inside of his own apartment. Like, for example, a stupid review of all of the movies I've watched over the past 2 months to pass time. This will also mean more talking head videos in general, like this one, where I essentially just deliver my journal entries to you. Anyway, I couldn't think of an interesting way to end this. I just appreciate those of you who somehow made it this far into the video, and for those of you who continue to support me for reasons I'll never quite understand.